Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Wednesday, June 8th. Starting right about at noon for me, so noon central time, so right in the middle there. I've drunk, actually I like to call it imbibed, a 5-hour energy drink extra strength, which probably is going to play a major factor in just resetting or changing when I'm asleep and when I'm awake and when I'm tired and when I'm not. Um, so maybe I can actually be awake during the day. Apparently, a new selection pack has arrived, or um, I guess maybe it arrived on June 9th in Japan time. Like, just said it was June 8th. And then Rilla's Mass Beyond Speed and Fusion Potential are all gone. Now, noticeably, there's also maintenance notice through the 9th and the 10th as shop items get updated. Um, Noticeably, at best, I could buy 50 packs. And that's just like the absolute best case scenario. For the accountability section today, I will say I played 1 2.5 hour episode of Nino Kuni, and then I got busy with a non-YouTube emergency that popped up. I'm not going to go into detail because it's boring. Suffice it to say, though, it might, as any emergency might, lead to me not making a lot of content or me not making any content at all. As far as the YouTube. So, yeah. And I changed that one setting and I'm still noticing frame drops. It really does just feel like there's something specifically about my new internet service provider that is just awful. Like, it seems like it's straight up lying way more than I've ever experienced as far as pretending like you have really high upload and download when you do a speed test, but then when you actually try to connect to YouTube to stream, it seems to be quality of service reduced to a ridiculous amount sometimes. And the only thing I could think of doing would be to stop the stream and then start the stream. And that would be risky, certainly. Let's try it. We'll do a little bit of an experiment here. We haven't started too much. I'm going to stop the stream and then I'm going to start the stream again in OBS. So I'm going to not discard the delay, so this will be like 30 seconds. I'll have to be just off. So we'll try this. Stop stream. Then for the recording, I'll pause. Okay. And then now I'm gonna start the stream again with the delay starting in 30 seconds. So we'll see if this works. This would be a hassle, certainly, if it was going to go in that route anyways, though, if I was going to go down that path. And yeah, that didn't fix anything. And fix anything at all. So, try and reset the router. But I don't think it is the router's fault. I don't think it's because I'm connected on my cell phone. Like, really, I have absolutely nothing happening right now. So the idea that there would even be anything happening on my network would be insane. Yeah. Alright, well, I'm going to leave that alone because that's just going to be something that would inevitably lead me towards trying to fiddle with things and not actually succeeding in anything. Alright, so we would have 1 day left if we really felt the need to go down any of these selection packs. As far as Ni no Kuni is concerned, the game, when I started playing, said prepare for the final battle with the White Witch. And 2.5 hours later, I still had not even seen the White Witch. So it puts a particularly long dungeon where the other dungeons in the game are fairly short. There would be a decent argument towards pulling 10 packs from this deck, but I think you're probably better off just not doing anything. Yeah. There will definitely be a point where we start to do some of this. But then also there's a problem seemingly with these selection packs that you end up with 4 copies of cards and then seemingly you can't get rid of them. Because if I could get rid of them, I should have gotten rid of them by now. Let's see. Edit deck. Dismantle all extra cards. Yeah, the odds that that extra card I just saw was in that tiny portion of extra cards I could dismantle is very, very low. Yep. Let's double check. Nope. It's fairly insane that the selection cards would not be dismantleable, because that really leads you down to a path where almost no cards are dismantleable then. Like, I don't think any of the cards you buy from structure decks are dismantleable. Or maybe they're miscalculating. Maybe I have like 3 copies of cards from this and then 1 extra from a selection pack, and I should be able to dismantle it, but the game is poorly programmed and it's not letting me. 7 days until the dual pass ends, so we should also keep that in mind. We'll have to buy a new dual pass. We might get a bundle deal, we might not. Otherwise, we are still just at the point where we need to play ranked. And I guess if we're having network trouble, then that sets me up to potentially get some cheap victories. I'm trying something out with all the summertime heat, having my door open, completely wide open while streaming. That will probably add a small amount of noise and change the room tone, as it were, in the recording, but probably won't do too much otherwise. It's not something I would want to stick with. It's a little awkward and creepy to have a door wide open, in my opinion. Although I suspect that might be very different for just how different people have come to find what's normal to them and their families. I'm sure some families are totally door open families where the doors are never closed, and then some families are totally door closed families where the doors are fairly significantly always closed for most of the time. So then the next big, we'll start going through the news, and the big news, and it's not really that there's much articles talking about this, At a certain point, it may not really even fall under the category of video game news, but Jeff Gerstmann is no longer working for Giant Bomb. Jeff Gerstmann, who founded Giant Bomb alongside Ryan Davis, who died probably over a decade ago at this point. He and Giant Bomb, or Giant Bomb specifically, put out a kind of creepy messages saying that they've decided to go their separate ways. Now, very quickly and hastily, without any evidence, in my opinion, that he was planning on doing this, he came out with the Jeff Gerstmann podcast as a product, and he came out with a Patreon and has already ads in his podcast for Blue Chew and Magic Spoon, which I've heard Magic Spoon is actually pretty awful tasting, and Blue Chew, I assume, is somewhat of a scam, but probably not that much of a scam. I'd suspect it works for some, but it's just too expensive if I was to guess. But yeah, what is the weirdest part, certainly, about this is this week's Bombcast has a whole new cavalcade of people, a 3x3 grid of people on the Bombcast, and they spend over an hour talking about how they're going to get back to video games and quick looks, and it's just going to be video games, inherently changing everything that they've been going towards as far as the latest acquisition of Giant Bomb from CBS to whatever Red Ventures or whatever the company that owns them. Which, okay, that would kind of make sense if they said they're getting back to quick looks and video games, and then if Jeff Gerstmann said, I'm doing something completely different, and I'm going a different direction, and our visions of the future just did not line up. But Jeff Gerstmann also on this podcast, which he did this Twitch stream for like 5 hours, so I'm like halfway through with it. He very much said video games. Now, inherently, you probably could disbelieve the new Giant Bomb, or whatever, a little bit, because they did an hour live stream with 9 people and didn't talk about any video games at all, which there definitely is something to that seems fairly ridiculous, that you would claim to be all about video games and then have a whole hour-long bombcast talking about how you're going to relaunch and change things up or bring back the greats of Giant Bomb. So my suspicion is there's a couple things that you could take from it. It could be that since Giant Bomb is bringing back Dan Reichard, I think maybe for the 3rd or 4th time at this point, it may be that Jeff is just completely tired of dealing with Dan Reichard. Jeff did not jump over to Nextlander with the other people. He did not. He may do that later, but he definitely was talking about some other people that he really wanted to to potentially have guests at some point in the future. But for the moment, he is really just selling his podcast as him streaming on Twitch. And not even really doing a good job of it, really. It feels like he never learned any basic tricks and tips on how to stream. His streams were like more polished before, so I have to almost assume that he had an editor that was just running the OBS software or whatever. If I didn't say it out loud, I am surprised I wouldn't say this out loud, but it definitely feels to me like his death warrant was signed. Jeff Gerstmann's death warrant was signed at least a year ago, when they brought in the CNET guy. What is his name? Like, because they inherently brought in the CNET guy to be a higher position than Jeff Gerstmann, who was the boss up until that point. And so he either refused a promotion, which is a great way to get yourself eventually fired, or he was overlooked for a promotion and replaced with Jeff Bakalar. It's way too many Jeffs. But yeah, once Bakalar came into the picture and was higher than him, that was a pretty obvious sign that he was going to be gone eventually. It does kind of feel like salary negotiations were happening annually. Maybe he's just asking for too much money, particularly in this last year. If he was asking for any kind of raise, that'd be pathetically bad. Even in his own podcast, he admits he only got halfway through Horizon Zero Dawn, like the second Horizon game, and he totally gotten pretty much nowhere with Elden Ring. So 2 of the maybe 4 or 5 AAA games that have come out this year, he didn't actually play, and he hasn't really been contributing anything potentially in years to Giant Bomb. In fact, Giant Bomb has just been a shell of itself in multiple different iterations for years since Dan Reichert died. Not Dan Reichert, but I forget, since the other founder guy died. And the fact that Giant Bomb has effectively brought on new staff to reinvigorate itself multiple times in the past decade does not make it feel like bringing on new staff once again, in this instance, is going to come out with any slightly different outcome. Inherently, Giant Bomb is dying because its community, which was somewhat locked behind a paywall, is probably stagnant or dying. That would be my assumption. They're moving a lot of their content away from the paywall, so what people were paying for that premium membership is going to change. But yeah, the community is probably stagnant and dying. You really don't need mainstream video game journalists at all anymore, but online ones in particular, without major amounts of money from a parent company like CBS, are doomed to fail. Like, it was a year ago that all the full-time staff was basically let go and replaced with part-timers, and now it feels like they're potentially doing the exact opposite thing, and instead getting rid of the part-timers and converting them into full-timers. And that would make a lot of sense if the budget to do that came directly from just getting rid of Jeff Gerstmann. The fact that he was just not prepared for this shows a lack of cunning on his part, certainly, but lots of people are not prepared for the surprise layoff, surprise firing. But he should have seen it coming since he's been fired before. It would be funny if there's just like some secret, like he got in a fight with somebody and punched somebody, or he slept with somebody, an employee or something, or he's being canceled or something. It'd be funny if there's something like that, but I seriously doubt that's it at all. It definitely seems like money. It doesn't even seem like a conflict of vision. It probably would have been better for Jeff Grossman to say, hey, I want to make a different kind of podcast, Twitch channel, and get away from video games, or at least come at video games from a different direction. It might very well be a case that Jeff Grossman was being told that you need to take more of a managerial role, and he didn't want to do that. And so, like, turning down a promotion last year, which he probably did, and then turning down a promotion this year, would be a very standard manager response to say, hey, we've offered you 2 promotions now, you've turned us down, you're stagnant in your position, we don't need you anymore. Like, we need people that are trying to struggle and go up in the world, people that will work on a salary for 80 hours a week. We need people that believe in the lie of you can pull yourself up by the bootstraps in your job environment. And I could totally see him not being sold on that lie. We'll probably never get anything concrete, unfortunately. And it certainly doesn't like encourage me to want to listen to the Jeff Gerstmann podcasts. Like, he's kind of bad at doing his overlays on Twitch with this first one, and he's kind of boring. He talked certainly a lot more on this podcast than he has been generally in Giant Bombs and over the past year or half year, but I don't know if he has anything passionate or intelligent to say. There's definitely, from what I'm gathering from this podcast, a case where there has been some 2-week period involved in this, because he didn't like watch the PlayStation Live Sony Play event. So that almost would imply that he was suspended for 2 weeks and then they fired him when he came back after a suspension of 2 weeks, which is also very common. But it isn't also super crazy, particularly at the managerial levels, for somebody to say, hey, I want to quit, I'm tired of this, and they say, why don't you take 2 weeks to think about it and then get back to us, we'll just give you a 2 weeks paid vacation. But yeah, it's worth pointing out that Giant Bomb, if you take away what the mainstream video game journalists, if you can call them that, because they barely do any journalism, Although that might change, who knows? Like, if you take away the personalities from Giant Bomb, all you really have is the forum and the database. And the database itself doesn't get used by anything as far as I know. So, like, there are at least 4 or 5 websites and databases that you can use to put in metadata and information about old video games ROMs. Not a single one of like software like Emulation Station or anything like that has, I don't think any of them ever tried to access Giant Bomb. And at a certain level that might be because Giant Bomb doesn't really have an API as a possibility. But if it actually doesn't have an API, there's really no reason for it to have a database in the first place, or Wikipedia type thing. If anything, it really is more than likely that Wikipedia should just expand its definition of what it considers relevant, and maybe expand how it works a little bit, so you could have an API behind it. Which is funny because, like, Comic Vine, on the other hand, which I suppose comic book fans who want digital comic books and were using Comic Rack more than anything before that pretty much disappeared from existence, they were using Comic Vine and scraping that database. And that probably is because there is a smaller amount of websites that would have a database of comic book information. But yeah, that was never the case for Giant Bomb. The difference there, I think, also too, is if you're using like a software like Comic Rack, it's not going to pull any information for you if you load in a digital comic book file. Whereas if you go to Steam and you own a game and install a game, a ton of information is already in Steam's database on Steam's website, so you just don't really need that information for modern games. You only need that information for games that are basically old ROMs. And Steam has a decent amount of old ROMs too. Yeah, I imagine we'll have some baseless speculation fun with Jeff Gersman's departure, and at the end of the day we'll have yet another podcast not worth listening to. Instead of 1, 2, that there'll be 3 now of former Giant Bomb celebrities. I was just thinking the other day I should probably unsubscribe from like tested.com, because the last time I even listened to a Tested podcast was probably 3 or 4 years ago. Particularly now with just like the inflation prices being so high, like now is definitely not the time to be a gadget fiend looking for the latest bit of technology. But also, even though I talked about that for a long time, it's kind of not video game news. One thing I did get is there might be a more lenient desire on Jeff Gersman's part to get back to the hobnobbing and becoming overly friendly and not really professionally detached from video game developers, which I hate to use the gate phrase, but that was definitely a part of what people never really liked and still don't really like about news journalists or people who should be news journalists just rubbing elbows with the people they're supposed to be reporting on, or killing stories or changing how the stories read to get more access for access journalism. It's way worse, certainly, when, say, CNN or some other major news company does it with a politician, certainly. But it has been fairly prevalent in the video game journalism field, just because people got away with it. Was an interesting admission there that Jeff Grossman went to like one class of college level, one college level class, and that was it. So he's effectively a college level dropout, which, yeah, you definitely don't need college to become extremely lucky at it and become a video game journalist 25, 30 years ago. Like, you didn't need it then. Trying to go down that same path today is almost certainly going to set you up for doom, because there's more than likely not going to be any video game journalists. It'll just be YouTubers and people much closer to me than Jeff Grossman. Let's move on. Apparently Minecraft is going to merge its launcher so that the Java and Bedrock games are going to be merged together. I feel like this is going to the beginning of the end of potentially Bedrock Edition. I mean Java Edition, not Bedrock Edition. All players that have either the Java Edition or the Bedrock Edition will receive the edition they do not currently own for free. This is also after a point where Microsoft forced anybody with a Minecraft account or a Mojang account to move over to a Microsoft account. So there's fairly big changes happening there. I don't own Bedrock Edition, but I don't particularly care to own Bedrock Edition either. I don't see how you can't be, how you couldn't be a negative Nancy on that announcement. They're gonna try and make it look like a good thing, certainly, but it almost certainly is the beginning of the end of Java Edition. They don't want to support Java Edition. At a certain point, they shouldn't be supporting a JavaScript version of the game. But does the Bedrock version do everything that the Java Edition does? Does it handle all the old mods? Probably not. It very much may come down to a case where there will be a legacy version of the Java Edition that just will be the last version, and they will stop putting out any updates for the Java Edition. Moving on, the game The Quarry is getting early reviews. It has an 81 on Metascore, so it seems like there's a pretty Metacritic, and OpenCritic is giving it an 82 between the top critic average, and 86% of critics recommend it. So the numbers do seem fairly high for this game, The Quarry, which there definitely was a chance of there was definitely a chance that it would just fail, because they would have overly focused on hiring famous actors to face scan and not spent the effort and the budget to actually make a good game. OBS on June 6th put out the scam alert There are Google ads that link to a fake version of OBS with malware. Google ads should prevent that, but they're not. And just below that, on March 21st, I totally missed this. OBS Studio is now out for Steam for Windows and Mac OS. So you can just straight up install OBS Studio via Steam, which would be potentially more portability at some point in the future. Not right now per se, but at some point in the future you might have a Steam Cloud save, which they don't support right now, that just holds all your settings and all your plugins, and you can potentially install on a fresh new install of Windows a Steam and then OBS through Steam, and then it would just be all set up and ready to go. That is certainly the dream. It's not particularly reality. It is, I think, also worth mentioning that I don't particularly trust the update process on Valve and Steam any different than I trust the update process just directly downloading OBS through their own updater that's built in. Somebody has jokingly labeled this game, by the way, as a psychological horror Souls-like dating sim. It's not even a game. It's free. It is the newest version, 27.2. There's no DLC or anything like that. Certainly if you were starting fresh, I would say install OBS Studio through Steam and start from that point. It'll probably save you some frustration as far as whenever you have to reinstall Windows. This is taking forever. And I can't counter spells in the graveyard, only characters. They have a little frequently asked questions. Is there a difference between Steam and the regular version? It's the exact same version. What operating systems does it support? And then here you can say, are cloud saves supported? No, they're not. They've experimented with enabling Steam Auto Cloud, but it ran into several issues and limitations, such as assets not being included in cross-platform sync, deleting files that shouldn't are getting stuck while in conflicts. They are working on building better ways of exporting and backing up your OBS data regardless of platform. Need to hurry up. Let's see. Are plugins supported? Yes. Most plugins should automatically use the Steam library path. If not, work around it. Plugins cannot be distributed via Steam Workshop due to OBS's GPL, GNU Public License. Will there be a Linux version? They don't have any plans at the moment to do a Linux version. Oops. I did hear the creator of OBS, or one of the main guys that works on OBS, talking about like the big project certainly for OBS that they want to work on and improve is to have a full-on integrated overlay system, which would certainly be helpful. I wouldn't need a third monitor if there was just a overlay here and there to tell me the time and tell me if streams are going all right and if I'm actually recording. That's all I really need, is just a widget. Having a full monitor is helpful. If I could have a widget that also would show me YouTube chat, that'd be nice, but even that I'm not doing through Steam. It's definitely a little surprising though that I didn't have that. I probably started a little too late today. Probably a little bit sleepier than I should be. So we should probably focus on news fairly quickly and try and burn through this. I seem to have a lot of news this Wednesday. Let's see. The order got put around a little bit, so we'll go through the Gemetsu articles first and then eventually get around to Video Game Chronicles articles. So Gemetsu says Xbox Game Showcase 2022 extended set is set for June 14th. Extended is the last part of this, and this would probably be better if this was underlined or in parentheses. So, an announcement for announcements. Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl is getting voice acting and items. The update is now available. Absolutely, All-Star Brawl needed some level of sound effects, and you probably couldn't get away with just having a lot of characters make little gibberish sounds. So they are taking the step that will be the first step towards it being an actually successful Smash Brothers competitor, which is maybe is a little unfair because I don't know for certain that Smash Brothers games, or the most recent Smash Brothers game, actually has voice acting for all the characters. I'm sure a lot of characters don't actually say anything, and there is no need for voice acting more than just noises. Like, I don't think Kirby is gonna say something. One way Smash Brothers definitely would have gotten around that is you have the main announcer character talking here and there, and so you'll hear like the crowd clapping and oohing and awing, or you'll hear the main announcer go, "Let's brawl," or "brawl" at the beginning of each fight. It's still very possible that the Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl is gonna really fail because it is still a lesser group of cartoon characters compared to what Nintendo could bring to Smash Brothers. Nickelodeon, in a lot of ways, which that's mostly, I mean, I think it's Nickelodeon, yeah. Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, both of those channels, to me, feel like they've kind of failed to be the new generation source for cartoon characters people really like. There's usually, within a generation, I think maybe 2 or 3 shows that people really like and have nostalgia for when they go back and think about it, but it's hardly the plethora of cartoons that older people had. The people that were looking at Bugs Bunny cartoons, which Bugs Bunny, I think cartoons came out in like the 20s. So that what happened is that a lot of the Looney Tunes cartoons, which they're still, I think, making them, they felt like they were brand new cartoons every time you saw them, even though they actually were not brand new cartoons. But that definitely left the possibility that you have Looney Tunes, Flintstones, Wacky Races, Scooby-Doo, a whole bunch of Hanna-Barbera cartoons. There's a ton of them people probably don't remember or don't care about also, but there was definitely enough of them and just so many in general that it definitely felt like there was cartoons on all the time in the mid 80s, early 90s era, whereas even though probably per hour having a cable channel dedicated to cartoons like Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network. Nickelodeon, I assume, is mostly dedicated to cartoons at this point. Back in the day, Nickelodeon had a lot of live action, Double Dare type content also. But yeah, hour to hour, I imagine there's way more cartoons airing, but they just don't have that impact. A major part of that, in my opinion, and I don't want to get too deep into this since this isn't video game related that much, but I think a major part of the reason why the next generations of cartoons didn't really succeed as well is because they're just not iconically animated. They're also not particularly cheaply animated either, so you're just not making that many. Hanna-Barbera, in a lot of ways, was super cheap and low quality in the cartoons they made, but they made enough, and kids aren't going to recognize that they're cheap and low quality. Now would be the time, if you're going to think about remastering things, you could go back and remaster significant Scooby-Doo cartoons and it make them look a lot better, just remaking them with the same story, and you wouldn't have to pay a writer. And they probably basically do that anyway, since the one Scooby-Doo episode is pretty much the same as the last. But yeah, the Adventure Time art style, the Home for Imaginary Friends art style, Johnny Bravo, Ed and Eddie art style, Courage the Cowardly Dog. I think Ren and Stimpy might have been in that group too, although that may have been an MTV cartoon. Like, pretty much all the originals that have come out of Cartoon Network in particular, but I imagine Nickelodeon too, do not have an art style that looks good at all. It's this weird, like, off-putting art style for every cartoon, and there's not even a word for it. At least now you could say, well, She-Ra is super woke as a cartoon on Netflix, and they draw the boy to be androgynous, and you can say, all right, well, we see where they're coming from that. I have no idea why Ed and Eddie is drawn the way it is. Like, it just seems like it's done oddly for no reason. It seems like it's just done by artists that don't really have skill or talent in drawing. It's probably just a ton of nepotism, or people who happen to be where the studio is, or the people getting the animation jobs. It would make a lot more sense if Saturday morning cartoons were shipping off most of the animation to Taiwan, Korea, or even Japan, although that's probably a little too expensive. And it would just come back looking a little bit anime-esque in its animation style. And I imagine some of that happens and it still doesn't work. It is weird. Netflix, if you'd asked me five days ago, really, 3 days ago, I would say Netflix feels like it has spent its last few pennies making the final season of Stranger Things, because that's like 31 million, I think, is what I heard per episode for Stranger Things. Just a ridiculously high amount of money to spend. But then over the past 3 or 4 days, Netflix has put out some major announcements for major other content, which doesn't make a lot of sense. It seems like really bad advertising. Like, they could have tempered every single news story that Netflix is gonna crack down on password sharing with an announcement of a new movie, and instead of like letting the negativity come up from the idea of a crackdown. Like, ideally Netflix would have said, we are planning to eventually crack down on password sharing, but look at all these new shows to justify keeping your subscription. Like, you could have easily done a distraction play there. But yeah, with all these announcements, it's a decent potential that every new announcement that they've shown on their YouTube channel, though, could also be fairly garbage movies and TV shows. But again, that's not video game stuff, so let's focus here. Dengen Entertainment is going to publish a psychological thriller called Loretta for PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC. She has like 8 eyes because of the cracked mirror, so maybe implying she's a Black Widow. I want to look at this, but also I don't want to get into the weeds of looking at every single trailer announcement. This definitely looks like it's kind of a point-and-click adventure experience, and it definitely looks like it could be somewhat spooky. Although in all fairness, it also looks like it might be a little too pixely. I do have the blur enabled right now, but there's kind of a lack of detail, feels like. Vestera Saga 2, the Sacred Sword of Sylvanista, launches July 28th in the West. It's a strategy RPG. First I've heard of this. Yeah, this looks like nothing that would interest me. Just an RPG Maker type game. I really hurt myself playing Ni no Kuni. I mean, I had to roll the dice on some JRPG, and it would have made a lot of sense to play Ni no Kuni if Ni no Kuni was the game it actually pretends like it is. If it was kind of a kid-friendly Pokemon game that with Studio Ghibli animation throughout, if it was a game that had way more voice acting in it, like if several ifs were improved on it, and it was just in general a good game in my opinion, then that would have totally been the choice. But it definitely puts me in a weird position now where I probably don't want to play an RPG for quite a while. I probably should get to Fallout New Vegas and play that. I don't think I have too many other Western RPGs to consider, although I may, and I would just have to kind of scroll down my exhausted list of video games that I own to figure that out. Alright. But yeah. At best, I probably can make the argument to at best I think I could make an argument to have to get back to the nonary games visual novel. I activate this. 4 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4. Summon this. That didn't work. Well, let's see if this works. Let's see, a game called Smelter Forged in Hell update is now available for PC, coming soon to consoles. This looks like this is a platforming, maybe hack and slash game. But it's getting an update, which is kind of weird because that's definitely not the kind of game I would expect to get an update. Oh, I guess I didn't mention in the accountability section, I spent probably an hour and a half at most putting together a lower level made for younger kids Lego Batmobile from Batman 66. Came with a Batman 66 Batman and a Batman 66 Joker, and it's a nice little model kit. I would say that's probably wasn't that expensive. It probably is pretty expensive now. I'm sure it's out of print. I've also heard all Lego sets, or a lot of Lego sets, are about to skyrocket in price or go up in price. Not skyrocket, just go up in price is what they've said. But yeah, it was a nice little set. Not getting too crazy. There's definitely an alternate universe version, if not an actual alternate version that exists, of a Batmobile that would have had 3,000 pieces instead of 300, that would have been potentially a little bit more detailed, and definitely a lot bigger. Although at a certain level, since the Batmobiles are mostly just a lot of black pieces or with curves, having a whole bunch of bigger detailed version is just going to be more pieces for pieces sake, and they would take it out of the minifig scale, which that's not that helpful really, to bring it out of the minifig scale. So I was satisfied with that. Normally when I decide to take a slight break to do Legos, it takes at least a day and ends up as a major distraction. In that case it didn't. Although very rarely do I find sets like that I actually want to own. The smaller kid friendly sets tend to just not have enough detail to look good. Very rarely do I, guess. Moving on, Barbarian Testament of the Primordials Challenge Mode update is now available for PC. It's due out in June for consoles. So again, there's an announcement for an update of an existing game. Ever tried Floor Editor update is now available for PC. I would have to assume that these three announcements all came from the same, yeah, Dingen Entertainment. Yeah, that would be my guess as to why they're all coming out and being announced at the same time. Hmm. So can Ash Blossom counter Maxi? And can Maxi counter Ash Blossom? Hmm. Hmm. Discard that. Activate that. Draw a couple cards. Set that. And we've got 2 cards we can actually use in the turn. Moving on, a monster taming RPG, Abomination is coming to basically everything. Bug Fables collaboration update is now available for PC. It's already on PC. One of the things about Ni no Kuni is the idea that it feels like it wants you to collect, or at least fight, probably just fight one of each of the monsters in the game, but the odds of actually even randomly running into one of each of the monsters don't feel completely guaranteed, and it creates a lot of grinding. It's a lot of grinding for no real sake, because it doesn't, even when you do grind, you still don't get more powerful. There are several gameplay mechanics like that, such as equipping better armor or having them level up or increasing their familiarity, where all of these are systems in Ni no Kuni, but none of them feel like they have any real connection to the actual fight mechanics. Nothing you do really seems like it significantly changes how much damage you can deal or how much damage you can take. Moving on, Era Fell Enhanced Edition, Rise of the Third Power, PS4 and Switch Physical Edition have been announced. 2 games being announced at the same time from publisher Dingen Entertainment. Smelter's PS4 and Switch Physical Collection Editions have been announced. And then Dingen Entertainment is going to publish a roguelite dungeon crawler called Dungeon Drafters for basically everything. Seems like it might be card based. Each character has a spell book here that's pulling out cards, which, let's see if that is better shown as to how it actually would play. Seems like you actually have to collect the cards, and then when you use them, you potentially use them up permanently. That is a gimmick, but that's a gimmick that probably wouldn't really intrigue me, to have the pretense of a card game while still really just having an RPG event, or a fairly standard pixely RPG game. That probably wouldn't catch my attention. Blossom Tales 2, The Minotaur Prince, launches August 16th for PC and Switch. This is a little less pixely. Like, if you could make all old games look at least this good, I would be fairly happy. If that was what RPG Maker games look like, this definitely feels like this might be influenced by Zelda games. Yep. Blossom Tales, I think, very well was a Legend of Zelda inspired clone. Let's see. See if we can find Blossom Tales 1. Like, you can see the heart and the magic and different buttons being depicted here. And fairly obvious gameplay mechanics that were taken from Zelda games, or as Zelda games had them at least. So what I want to check is Blossom Tales 1. Yeah, Blossom Tales 1 came out March 2017. It is on my wish list. So that would give me an excuse to potentially buy it and play it. If there were more Zelda clones in existence, and this is more of the Game Boy Zelda games instead of like Ocarina of Time clones or the NES Zelda games, although you do run into a kind of weird middle ground where if you called it an NES Zelda game, it would be too simplistic. It would have only 2 actions and 2 buttons. So that this really does go more towards the Game Boy games, because you see there's 3 actions and probably more gameplay mechanics and more variety in enemies. That's the wrong one to return, but it doesn't matter. So yeah, if I had more time, that would be an indicator, yeah, for me to buy the Blossom Tale and start playing it. But since I don't have time, it's kind of pointless to buy it. It's also kind of pointless to imply or suggest or ask for people to like friend me on Steam and gift me the game. Like, if people did that, I guess I would still try to graciously accept it and play the game as soon as possible. But I don't know how quick as soon as possible is going to be. One thing that is occurring to me is that there is a possibility that footage is just going to stop airing, and I'm going to potentially just miss Halloween month, as a tradition, and not even bother to try to play any horror games. Moving on, back to video game news. WayForward is going to publish the side-scrolling platformer Lunark for basically every platform. This again looks a little too pixely for a modern game, as much as I'd like to see WayForward succeed. A game called Bill and Ted's Excellent Retro Collection has been announced for PS5, PS4, Switch, and PC, which I kind of suspect this is a collection of old Bill and Ted's games, looking at these screenshots. Surely here you've missed a launch window where this would have been released around Bill and Ted's Face the Music coming out. When that came out, that was like a year or 2 ago. Let's see. So it will include the NES Bill and Ted's Excellent video game, the Game Boy Bill and Ted's Excellent Game Boy Adventure: A Bogus Journey. So just 2 games. Which maybe that's the only 2 games that really exist. And it certainly does paint a awkward situation that will start to happen more often if you try to bring back old games, is that you will see versions of games that are for the NES and then completely different versions of games that are for the Game Boy, and the Game Boy versions particular being like 4 Shades of Grayscale would probably have no chance of ever selling otherwise. So they probably should just be free add-ons to NES games. Although some of these bundles also still feel a little small. At a certain point, the Bill and Ted's games might be better if they were just included in a larger collection of games made by whoever made the Bill and Ted's games. You get 20, 30 games in a collection, not 2. A classic side-scrolling action game called Rendered Range R2 is coming to PS5, PS4, Switch, and PC. This is just a fairly old game being published by Ziggurat. And I forget whether it was Ziggurat or Pico Interactive that is kind of known for doing a bad job of taking old ROMs and then selling them with very little polish or effort on Steam. A Boy and His Blob Retro Collection has been announced for PS5, PS4, Switch, and PC. It includes the NES original and Game Boy sequel again. The title of Boy and His Blob is very familiar to me, but I never saw this game when it originally came out. Honestly, it in the times I've seen it, feels like it is too complicated of a game for its era, or even for now. I feel like there also was a remake or a reboot of A Boy and His Blob, which still probably doesn't really make a lot of sense. Discard that from my hand. Destroy that. Yeah, I'm already yawning, getting a little sleepy. A co-op side-scrolling action game called Death Wish Enforcers has been announced for PS5, PS4, and Switch. If these are all coming from the same publisher, that would certainly explain why they're all coming to the same consoles. Seems like they're all coming from limited run games. But yeah, particularly if you're seeing more of a focus of sales in the East and Japan, focusing in only on the PlayStations and Switches makes sense. Limited run games may be snubbing Microsoft consoles for some reason here, and PC for some reason. Let's see, a Sonic Central broadcast is set for June 7th, so apparently that already happened. Didn't hear anything around that. A Capcom showcase is set for June 13th, according to Gamatsu. So we'll get, let's say, 35 minutes of Capcom game information. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of it has more to do with Street Fighter than like Biohazard, Resident Evil. Maybe Capcom doesn't own Street Fighter. That's a possibility. Yeah, I'm getting really sleepy here. I need to probably stop playing and just focus on the news. DNF Duel has a troubleshooter trailer. Here's a new character, obviously. Konosuba, God's Blessing on This Wonderful World, Cursed Relic, and Perplexed Adventures have been delayed to September 29th in Japan. Which is funny because I don't really think Konosuba as an anime series is still on TV. If it is, it's not being majorly focused on this season. And I don't know if I really would think the Konosuba series makes a lot of sense to be the base for video games or even dungeon crawlers and things like that. It kind of feels like they're Konosuba is just being used as a name to potentially put on what would be otherwise just very generic dungeon crawlers. Let's see, Soul Hackers 2 25th anniversary music album samples video is, I guess, now available to check out. Oh, I should talk about my favorite lewd mobile game. Hey, there, the network just fixed itself too. Destiny Child has just a few more hours on its current raid boss. I did incredibly well this event. So much so that I was actually able to take on the boss of the raid boss, which is, I think they call those raid bursts, because the number of times you defeat a raid boss at the top level of level 30 increases the number of raid burst tickets you might get. I think, I don't actually know how it works. And then I had enough raid burst tickets to actually defeat the raid burst boss of the bosses at level 1 and level 2, whereas I've never even gotten close to defeating it at level 1 before. Part of that definitely is because I'm sticking with the very small community of Destiny Child on Reddit, and they're putting out good, helpful information as far as how to build up your teams to be a lot more powerful. But yeah, I'm still enjoying it. Although I will say, moving over to the Google version to get the ads, and then having to switch from my Wi-Fi to my mobile connection because I have an ad blocker on my Wi-Fi to see the ads, and just getting the ads that then give you more raid tickets, which means you have to play even more, is fairly exhausting, to say the least. I don't really know if there was a better way to have handled it. It just did manage to take a lot of time. Let's do this with this here, and then see if he wants to do anything else. But yeah, I am definitely ready to move on to something that would be maybe a little bit more laid back. And not as demanding. I am also appreciating that I'm just getting better and better at the game. There's a point, I guess, maybe I could top out at it. I get the feeling that I may top out of Destiny Child and be bored with the game just about the time that it starts going into maintenance mode and they just wrap up the story. And hopefully they do wrap up the story and don't just abandon it. Which that would be the fear, certainly, is that they would stop putting new content in. Although at a certain level they would have to stop putting new content in the Korean version, and then you would probably have 2 or 3 years of the last bits of content that you could put on the global version. Although they may be speeding up the releases of the global version to get it more in line with the Korean version and the Japanese version. Alright, let's go ahead and detach this. I did poorly there. Yeah, suffice it to say I played poorly there. Snap to the graveyard. Activate that. I've been looking at Hulu and they're kind of awful lineup, but not really as bad as I think Hulu might be about the worst of the lineups of content. But they have this spin-off series called American Horror Stories, IES, instead of American Horror Story, Y, which is a spin-off, and I like the first season or so of American Horror Story, and eventually I liked the first few of them. Eventually I lost interest in them, which is a shame because that was about the only show in decades that actually tried to do anything slightly edgy or slightly scary on TV. But yeah, suffice it to say I've been somewhat distracted. Let's see if we can activate this effect to bring about the character we're looking for. This guy is taking too long to play. Let's see. Moving on with Kometsu. AI the Somnium Files Nirvana Initiative details have 3 more characters they want to highlight and show off. Let's see. Can I use Ash Blossom to cancel that effect? No, but it didn't matter anyways. Let's just go to battle phase. Don't really have to do anything here. Let's look at some of the games that came out on Steam in the past couple days. Here we have Arcade Flight, which is at the wrong camera angle for this idea, so that's going to be a no. We have a Hero Realms, which looks like it might be a decent card game, CCG, so I'll give it a follow. We have Beanstalker. At some point I need to actually be more awake so I can do some better follow list cleanup and maybe be a little bit more critical and not just put a ton of stuff in the follow list. Although at a certain point it also may not matter, just because it does seem like it's a system that is working fairly well. This game Beanstalker is a VR game, but I'll put it on the follow list. I don't know if I did put it on the follow list or if it was already on the follow list. Here we have a game called Rob, which just looks like a bad shoot 'em up. Here we have a game called Departure, which is probably an asset flip mystery game. I like this logo though from Icarus. At least somebody's trying on the logo. I'm gonna give this a follow. arguably on the logo alone. There could be a puzzle game around that that really deserves to be talked about. While he's taking his time, here we have a game called Rogue Arrows, which seems to be like you're on these platforms. I mean, at a certain level, it's not too far from what like the Binding of Isaac would have been if you take out all the imagery in the Binding of Isaac. You have this rogue elf creature and you can upgrade 4 pieces of equipment. Yeah, there might be something to that. I can see it not being much though. Divine Beast in the graveyard. What? That didn't work. He didn't have a Divine Beast in this graveyard. So either he didn't know what this card did, or he didn't anticipate me being able to bring out this character that then banish this card. But you probably didn't anticipate it, otherwise he would have just surrendered. Yeah. Really sucks to be an hour into a stream and then have the network just magically fix itself without changing anything. And you know what is extra weird today is the light bulbs are getting brighter. Or they were for a brief second there. And if the light bulbs are getting brighter, that means we're having over voltages, which a little bit of over voltage is probably fine if you're running in the United States 110, 115 volts, and then it bumps up to 120, even 125, you're probably fine. If you start getting to way higher than that, of course, you'll short circuit things. I'm going to do some card destruction there. That's going to work out perfectly for me. Let's see. Like he pretty much just lost the game there. I think we'll say no to that. Might be trying to summon Exodia with this card draw. And a 1-turn win. Let's see. Next we have a game on Steam called The Bread Maker, which is tagged as a horror visual novel. This is a different art style. You don't see that very often. Alright, well, summon this. We'll just take the victory. Yeah, it definitely feels like he had one strategy that he got wrecked on. So if this is a visual novel and it's cooking and making bread, yeah, there might be something to it, so I'll put it on the fall list just because of this art style. I imagine there isn't anything too much to it. Here we have a game called Another Side, which Probably is an asset flip horror game. I'm definitely not seeing a lot in the screenshots. So I think I can be strict enough to just say no to that. Start here. Then they're gonna Ash Blossom. I guess I can't Ash Blossom the Ash Blossom. Okay. We'll toss this. Put this face up. Activate that. Send that to the graveyard. Activate that. Add this to the hand, I guess. I could get up to 3. Can't attack this turn anyway, so should probably just leave it here and hope nothing happens. Although it almost certainly will. Here we have a game on Steam called Crush Them, which looks kind of like a mobile game. It's a tower defense game according to the tag. Good enough for me to ignore it. Although in all fairness, I probably need to reevaluate whether I believe tags or not, because clearly I've seen some games that really are not tagged correctly. This Logica Modica doesn't look like anything of interest. Space Worthy doesn't look interesting. Let's try this now. 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll just go ahead and banish his card. Is there something worth summoning? No. Do this. And then this. And then yeah, end the turn. Here we have a game called The Search for Fran 2, which probably is just an asset flip garbage game. So I'm going to say no. Here we have a game called Meet and Greed. Yep. I was thinking about it just yesterday or today. Somebody mentioned like Charlotte's Web, and it is kind of surprising that there hasn't been a Charlotte's Web video game. Winnie the Pooh, on the other hand, has the original concepts of Winnie the Pooh that would pretty much exclude Tigger and anything else Disney made has fallen into the public domain. So we probably will start to see Winnie the Pooh type games, and there's been an announcement of a Winnie the Pooh type horror movie, which honestly that may just be counter programming to make a really awful low budget Winnie the Pooh horror movie to then show to politicians to say this is why copyright needs to exist even longer. And there is an Animal Farm game that was announced. I don't know if it ever came out of early access. This one, Meet and Greed, is apparently a puzzle platformer that I don't think has anything to do with Animal Farm. It's just animals, possibly in a factory farm. I'm going to give this a follow. Although this may very well just be like PETA propaganda type or vegan propaganda type game that may not even be propaganda. It may be 100% accurate depictions of what could happen to animals being raised for their meat. I guess inherently part of the problem, though, is there's this long history of people failing to convert books to TV, and if you can't even successfully convert a book to a television medium, I don't know if there's a better or easier way to convert a book to an interactive video game. You certainly can see a direct path of converting a book to a visual novel. All you have to do then is make a kinetic visual novel with no branching story path lines and put some visuals around it. But you could also have done that with a movie, and yet it does not work. I'm just gonna end the turn here, I guess. Here we have a game called Canverse, which seems to be an attempt at tabletop gaming, although it seems to really only show chess and checkers. It looks pretty, so I'm gonna give it a follow, just to see if it ever comes out of early access. I already have Tabletop Simulator and haven't gotten around to playing that. We have Tamashii Party, which, is this a single player game? Discard card from your hand. Okay, well, we will discard that. Nope, this is a split screen PvP, player versus player experience. Which, yeah, had I looked at the screenshots more, I would have recognized that immediately. So that's going to be a no. Space Theory is a side-scroll shooter. Nothing there of interest. We'll just see if we can counter his strategy. We have a game here on Steam called TDS War Game, which I assume is a tower defense type game, although maybe not. Regardless, it looks uninteresting. We have a game called Robber Sam, which looks like it is mostly an asset flip game, but I think I'll give it a chance. There is that one game, Thief Simulator, that I don't know if that ever came out of early access or if that became any more interesting to people. That is certainly something a video game can do for you, though, is let you do something that is illegal and dangerous, like being a thief, and experience it or mentally toy with the thought without putting yourself in danger. Of course, there is very notably the game Thief, where you do that, and Dishonored is not too different from the game Thief. Let's see. Add this to my hand. Got 2 cards. So if we activate this, I'll get rid of that in the graveyard. Summon here. Activate effect. It may only let me summon 3. Nope, didn't let me summon any. I'll try this again. Nope, that didn't work either. None of my strategies apparently worked there. Here we have a game on Steam called Treats Please, which seems to be just a matching game of some sort. Nothing interesting there. Here we have a game called The Last Taxi, which looks like a VR game where you control a taxi. I'll give it a follow, but it kind of feels like a dumb concept. Make sure I'm not getting any phone calls. That's another thing, is I may get a phone call at any point. There is either somebody put in the wrong information for WhatsApp and they were trying to get a WhatsApp security code, or I heavily suspect it might have just been a scam, because I was getting all these phone calls and text messages saying your WhatsApp security code is this, and I've never even used WhatsApp, so as far as I recall, I may have installed it for half a second, but I don't think I've even done that much. Yeah, because I don't even know what WhatsApp is for. It really sucks that the internet has boiled down to a few top tier sites, and that's where everybody goes. Like, we are no longer in the wild wonderland of potentially going to a new service or trying something new. It'd be kind of crazy to say not get either an iOS or Android phone and get something like a BlackBerry operating system phone. It'd be fairly crazy to use some weird email service instead of the standard ones. Gmail being very prominent there. Let's try this again. 3 cards. 1, 2, 3. Counter trap. Nothing's gonna work there. Let's get back to some Gematsu articles. Nobunaga's Ambition Hado has been announced for iOS and Android. A mobile game from Koei Tecmo. NCSoft announces an interactive movie game called Project M for console. Story and ending is shaped by the player's decision. We may start to see more of that happen, certainly, is that we'll have games that are just going to be labeled as interactive movies. Honestly, not a terrible thought anyways, because if you really did move away from the idea of visual novels and started making interactive movies, you could potentially make games good enough that you could trick Westerners into playing them. Of course, that's a lot of budget. We've been seeing what are effectively interactive movies in games in the West off and on since like Heavy Rain came out. It's kind of a great example of a game that one of the early Quantic Dreams, I think is the name of the company that was doing that, and the Telltale games are sort of interactive movies, although they tend to be a little bit closer to visual novels since they have more text on the screens than text prompts. And at a certain level, just dumbed down interactive movies pretending like they are video games may bring in a larger audience of people that just want to zone out and control things a little bit, but don't want to have to mash the A button like crazy. That's something with Ni no Kuni that's really annoying, is that you're grinding through these fights and I'm just tapping A after A after A. It's just the A button is the only attack button. Moving on, Game Deck for Switch launches July 1st. It's first released on PC September 2021, which I don't know exactly what it is. It says it's an RPG. It's rated M for mature. Yeah, there is something here. Guess that would catch my attention somewhat, yeah. Fire Girl Hack and Splash Rescue DX for PS5, Xbox Series, PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC launches June 22nd. The PC update is due out the same day. I assume that this is not a way forward game. This, if I recall correctly, was a game I was actually fairly interested in. Yeah, it's not from Way Forward. And it just didn't, I think, get reviewed very well. Yeah. You can see here on Steam, it's at 60% with 58 user reviews. It's still on my follow list. So maybe the DX version can improve some of the complaints. I'm not sure what the complaints really were. I think the controls. Randomly generated levels with platforming. It obviously needs a lot more testing and polish. Yep. So yeah, we get all the daily quests done. Not really moving up in the ranks, obviously, but I'd be fairly happy to just be done with the daily quest and then focusing on the news and wrap up the stream. Yeah, if there's only a way I could find to make every stream ended at about 2 hours and just have a hard cutoff point. But I don't see a way to do that. Destroy a card with a ranked duel, activate a trap in ranked duel. And then another spectate duel live. I guess I do need to play a little bit more. Let's see, the Farm Life RPG Pictureshire has been announced for PC, which definitely looks like a Stardew Valley clone. Looks nice, but Stardew Valley really convinced me that I never want to play those kinds of games. Bloober Team teases the new title to be announced soon. It's seemingly another sequel or prequel to Layers of Fear. Reach beneath the surface and uncover the source of your fears. So yeah, that's possibly a prequel. The problem, certainly with Bloober Team games, though, is I still have yet to see one that actually feels like a game and isn't just really more of a walking simulator. In all fairness, the Layers of Fear game, the DLC was pretty good, in my opinion, but the Layers of Fear main game did have a lot more interactivity than you normally would have in a walking simulator. But I still would lean towards describing it as a walking simulator. There's just not much else you could call it. It needed a gameplay mechanic more than just walking around or finding a hidden spot or solving a simplistic puzzle. every now and then. If they had just embraced something like Fatal Frame, it would have worked a lot better. Like, have the crazy painter have a magic paintbrush that he can swipe through ghosts when they appear, or capture ghosts in the paint or something. Like if there were ghosts popping up and chasing after you, and then you probably have some level of gameplay mechanic. Although at a certain point, a painter having a camera would make a lot of sense too, where you could actually be scored for taking pictures, and it could even be like a Pokemon Snap type situation where you're getting scores for better pictures of ghosts. Anyways, moving on. F1 Manager 2022 launches August 25th. It has a gameplay trailer if you want to check it out. This is still all Gamatsu articles. Evil West launches September 20th. It's a third-person action game. I don't feel like I've seen this. It could be interesting. Half monsters, half Wild West. I always want to see a cowboy game succeed. This would be half of getting that, but you'd still very much be playing a very unique and odd game. Unique and odd's not the craziest idea, though. Instead of generic and repetitive. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Aeon Noise trailer is available. If you want to check that out on Gamatsu. Sonic Origins Overview trailer is out. Sonic Origins is not Sonic Frontier. Sonic Origins is the collection of old Sonic games, I think. Although, that's not what's being completely shown here. Instead, they're showing a whole bunch of different Sonic things. This is probably Sonic Frontier here. And the idea of monsters creating platforms that he has to run on is not a terrible thought as far as monster machines. But yeah. Let's double check here, I guess, and I will click on Sonic Origins Steam Link just to be certain that it is the collection. It is the reselling of the old Sonic games to people, a lot of people who already own the Sonic games, with potentially no real improvements or changes. Okay. Discard this. Destroy this. Destroy another card. Destroy this. I wouldn't be surprised if this game gets negatively review bombed fairly quickly. We haven't heard the phrase review bombing in a long time either. I think they've probably given up on that for a while. They'll wait until somebody makes that their excuse for a game being negatively reviewed. I haven't been talking about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. There's nothing really video game related to that, but with that trial being settled the way it has been settled so far, with Amber Heard losing, we might start to see a little bit more credibility on not letting people claim that they're being persecuted or mistreated when they really aren't. The Jussie Smollett trial, I think, also started us down in that direction. So I wouldn't be surprised if we are past a point where a game developer can say, oh, we're being targeted because our game is woke or because our game is actually good or something. Like, those kinds of excuses probably won't fly anymore, and they never really did in the first place. But yeah, the whole concept of the review bomb, it was always a dumb idea. Like, because it was just always an excuse to explain why your game was getting poorly reviewed, instead of just admitting that you'd done something fairly big to piss off the audience. Like, video gamers in particular, maybe more than other genres, really want to love video games, in my opinion. Whereas I think some football fans really would be more than happy just to hate on their football team, hate on other people's football teams, and non-stop every season. But gamers generally want to give games a chance. Moving on, Sonic Frontiers has some new gameplay and animated special prologue information videos here if you want to check that out. So that was clearly all together as one announcement. Bin Studio unveils a new logo and teases a new open world IP with multiplayer elements. Open world IP with multiplayer elements from a company I've never heard of does not sound like a particularly good combination. A Soul Hackers 2 Collector's Edition has been announced. The Tomorrow Children Phoenix Edition launches in 2022 for the PS4. Which, yeah, I will be really surprised if this relaunch of the Tomorrow Children somehow succeeds to change any sales numbers. Japanese rail sim Journey to Kyoto is coming to PC on June 23rd. Which, okay. Looks like it'll even be support English. It's gonna be weird, certainly, as a Westerner to try to play a game like that. Apparently this was available already for the Switch, the 3DS, and the PlayStation 4. The Legend of Heroes Kuro no Kisekai 2 Crimson Sin launches September 29th in Japan. According to Gamatsu, we're almost done. They have the Famitsu issue 1749 scores, giving Mario Strikers Battle League a 32 out of 40, and Overlord Escape from Nazarick a 31 out of 40. Now, is that Overlord the old Pikmin clone game, or is it an anime Overlord game? It is the anime Overlord game. Let's see. And clearly it hasn't been talked about too much. Yep. Overlord is an anime where, like, a player is in this MMO and he's super powerful and he becomes this, like, demon king with a whole bunch of, like, subjects at the end of this MMO. And at some point he also even acquired the ability to kind of cheat that MMO. And so he decides to stay in the game as they're shutting down the servers, and then he wakes up in a different fantasy world, although still super powerful, Um, and it's a standard Another World isekai game. What this looks like is it's a game that is barely even connected to that narrative. Seems like you're playing as a completely different character instead of the Overlord. Let's see. Here's another anime game. Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid Burst Forth Trogon Breath launches August 25th in the West, which I'm a little surprised it's going to launch at all in the West. It's a shoot 'em up game. Again, seems like they're just putting an anime label on a very generic game. Is this Capcom that's doing this? Bushi Road and Kaminari Games. Interesting, I haven't heard of those companies. Okay. Let's go and end the turn there. Got a couple more Komatsu articles. Soul Hackers 2 third trailer, digital editions, and first DLC have been announced. This is probably the full cast of characters, or the main important cast of characters. Looks like one of the characters' face might be hidden. It does feel like an odd combination of characters, certainly. But an odd cast of characters is not a bad thing. Summon that. Could summon that. That's about it. But they need to actually play something. Let's see. Deliver Us Mars launches September 27th for PC, PS4, 5, Xbox One, and Series. Which I think this is... Well, there might be something interesting in that idea. If you're going on adventures, rock climbing, doing several different activities on Mars, mostly platforming, puzzling, I would assume. Yeah, and I don't think this is like... Oh, it is a sequel to Deliver Us the Moon. Interesting. Which... What does Deliver Us the Moon look like? Deliver Us the Moon is also 3D. It's a puzzle platforming game. It is rated very positively. It's on my wish list. This may have been one of these games where you see a lot of recordings, but even at that, these screenshots look totally new to me. So it feels like something that I must have forgotten about. And that would make sense too if it came out in October 2019. I imagine I've forgotten a lot of games that came out that far behind. Then our final Gematsu article is Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes Awaken Rivals trailer and demo is now available. If you want to check that out. Here we have a game called Pass the Fish, which doesn't look quite good enough. Here we have something called the Dead Rooms, which looks like it's a zombie survival roguelike. There might be something to that. Yeah, let's just activate this. one of the things that spooks me is I decided to put a automated like air freshener outside of my bedroom door in the hallway, and every now and then I hear it go off, and it's just like, oh, this is a really squeaky, kind of creepy sound it makes. Alright. Let's go ahead and get rid of that too while we're at it. Just continue to destroy any strategy he might have. Here we have a game on Steam called Unlife, which looks like it's kind of a horror Metroidvania. They're calling a survival platformer. I'm gonna give this a follow. There's a chance it's good. At least they're trying to make a trailer to make me think it could be good. Here we have Attack at Dawn, North Africa, another one of these military games that doesn't look that good. Here we have Justice.exe, which I don't think that there's probably a chance that I'd play this, but I'm gonna be cautious and give it a follow anyways. We have a game called C&T, which just looks like a joke asset flip game, so we can say no to that. Here we have something called The Maze, which is obviously an asset flip maze generator game. I don't know what you would do actually if you were going to make a game based around a labyrinth or a maze. You probably have to lean heavily into the concepts of the Labyrinth movie, in which very little of that movie has anything to do with the labyrinth, and it has way more to do with the interactions with people and solving challenges. This obviously is a Chinese mobile game that doesn't support English, so no to that. Meanwhile, while I was doing all over that, he summoned Hamon, Lord of the Striking Thunder. Let's go ahead and set this. Activate effect. Can banish 2 cards, which then can get me I'll try this, I guess. Then I guess you do this. Then I guess you send that back. And I guess that's as much as I can do. Here we have a game on Steam called Japanese A-N, which looks like it's a very poorly designed learn Japanese game. Notice that there's a fairly high obsession with learning Japanese and very little obsession with learning other languages in game form. Here we have something called Kaiwa, which see what happens when we activate this effect. And let's activate this effect next. Special summon this, and then this. And summon this. Go here. Special summon this. We got several things. Well, this, as far as the visuals, looks very spooky, very Junji Ito, I think is how you pronounce that. Unfortunately, English is not supported, it's Japanese only. So I can give this a follow and hope that maybe it would get a translation in the future, but I suspect it's not. Seems like it's going to be 100% text-based, even though we're not seeing any text here. So every picture we're seeing here may be the only pictures we see. These may be just a collection of 3 screenshots, 3 backgrounds that are shown, and that's that. It feels somewhat reminiscent of the anime Tokyo Ghoul. Here we have a visual novel Chinese game with some anime girls leaning into each other, possibly about to kiss. Again, this kind of feels like this is a Chinese game though, and not quite polished enough. Guess we'll take this. I'm probably losing at this point. Did I get all the daily quests done? That would be the question. I may just have to play off screen and focus on the news. Otherwise, this is going to be a 3 hour and 30-minute long stream. Yeah, Jeff Grossman's Twitch podcast is going to, if it's going to succeed, which in all fairness, like, it's really a little bit unfair how having your name out there gets you success before you've even proven yourself. And Jeff Grossman's podcast, I'm sure, will have thousands of subscribers, thousands of Patreons before he's even put out any decent amount of quality or content. Yeah, I'd have to play probably 2 more times to get these daily quests done. There might be an argument for making up for some lost time too because of that. But yeah, my main point was Twitch loves for Twitch streamers to stream forever. 5-hour streams or more. Here we have somebody in the chat putting in Japanese. I do not read Japanese well enough that I could understand what that says. I see each in there in the second word as one symbol because each is easy to understand because it's just a dash middle line in the middle, but I couldn't possibly tell you what the rest of it says. I have to pretty much insist people post in English so that I can make sure they're not posting offensive things too. So because of that, I'm gonna have to make apologies, but I'm gonna have to go ahead and just remove that comment. Not just because I don't know what it is. So, apologies. Let's see, we have a game on Steam here called 20 Minutes Till Dawn, which is a top-down twin-stick shooter. I kind of like the art style when you see the characters because there's a lot of shading and detail there, but in the actual game, when you start to zoom out, it does not look anywhere as good. There was a game that came out maybe a year or two ago that had these like witches that were in this bright crimson red art style, with a lot of blacks, black colors and black backgrounds. That game came and went, I suppose. Here we have what looks like a Game Boy clone, or maybe actually old Game Boy games, called Space Wing War. It's English only. Still, I'm going to say no to that. We have Psycho in Love. This looks like it's a Korean visual novel. It doesn't look particularly as nicely animated as I'd like, or the animation style is just not to my taste. Take your pick as to how you'd want to describe that. Here we have Speedway Challenge 2022, which is a motorbike game of no interest. We have Call of the Cruel, or Crawler, Call of the Crawler, which looks like it's a card-based strategy game. No visual polish there though. We have Brave Deeds of the Rescue Team, which is a city management game controlling firefighters, it looks like. No to that. Although I can see kids maybe liking something like that, but then a management game would probably be too complicated for kids. Dark Self Other Mind. It's probably an asset flip horror game, but I'm going to be cautious and give it a follow. Under Siege is a top-down tanks game. Nothing there of interest. Stay Alive looks like a ugly asset flip survival game, so no to that. The Cycle Frontier here is mixed at 49%. It's a free-to-play game, but it must be pay to win with in-app purchases. Otherwise it wouldn't just be so horribly reviewed. Which is a shame, because potentially if this wasn't a player versus player experience or an online PvP experience, these visuals, if they were in a single player game, might catch my attention. Let's see, Project Showdown, Project Sundown, looks like a asset flip zombie shooter, and they're showing off achievement pop-ups in game, which a lot of people don't like those. Apparently Guerrilla Collective has got a sale going on, and that includes 10% off My Lovely Wife, which is the spiritual successor, if not the direct successor, to My Lovely Daughter, where you basically get this succubus wife, and well, if any of the screenshots would load in, I'd show it. Interesting. It's been a long time since I've had that problem too, where the screenshots were taking a while to load in. I don't know if in this game the succubus wife turns into other kinds of monsters, where My Lovely Daughter you could use alchemy to transmute her into different things, and that was the goal, is to make a human instead of a monster. Shoot 'em up here instead of shoot 'em up is nothing of interest. Sail Sim looks like a mobile game, so I'm gonna say no to that. Our City looks like an old mobile game, or an old game, old shoot 'em up, more than a mobile game, so no to that. Way of the Badass looks like they're trying to do a South Park game. I think this is probably a joke game. Probably not a really good game. It's also very weird that you would have a real world doll of your character buying merchandising or making merchandise before the game even is out. I'm looking at this screenshots though in this trailer. I don't think I would actually play this game. I doubt I'll ever even get around to playing the two South Park games, which would probably do it better. Here I have something called Chaotic Loop, which, yeah, it's not quite visually polished enough. Alright, so then that's going to bring us to our GameDeveloper.com articles. Gala Games Grit is the first NFT game on the Epic Games Store, which that's probably not really a feather in the cap for the Epic Games Store. Square Enix won't spend the cash from the 300 million studio sale on blockchain projects, which we'd already heard that. A musical story, Overboard, and more have been named as Apple Design Awards. Oh yeah, the Apple press event happened and they announced M2 chips instead of M1 chips, which maybe would be slightly better at playing video games. And part of that announcement definitely was to highlight that Resident Evil Village is going to be ported to be played either on the iPad or MacBooks on the M2 chips. If anything, from what I heard, there's a decent chance that the M2 chips are actually better than Intel and AMD chips, and it really would just come down to support at a certain level. Can you get all the old games to work on an M2 chip? Can you ensure that all new games work on M2 chips? And that would take a major commitment from Apple, and I don't know if I believe Apple would commit to video games at all. The Epic Games boss Tim Sweeney slams a scam in a Fortnite NFT project, which is certainly odd when they just let an NFT game on their own storefront. Gala Games accidentally handed out placeholder art NFTs for Grit, by the way. So, accidentally, yeah. I guess you have to take them at their word there. Apparently, there's a report that Nintendo is sitting on an unannounced 1-2 Switch sequel that playtested horribly. The sequel reportedly takes inspiration from Jackbox games and would support up to 100 players, which I don't know how you'd support up to 100 players except for online. Yeah. 1-2 versus 100. 1-2 Switch versus 100. What kind of makes sense as far as the types of small projects that Nintendo has been doing lately. Let's see. And then Keywords has bought the Age of Empires Definitive Edition developer Forgotten Empires for $32.5 million. The studio's worked on multiple entries in the Age of Empires Definitive Edition series, which is not to say they are getting Age of Empires, which I believe Microsoft owns. And I'm not sure if there's a need to make any more Age of Empire Definitive Edition games. Age of Empires is kind of a great example of a game that I played when I was a kid, and I probably wouldn't have much to say if I played it now. It would take a ridiculous amount of time. So it falls into this odd category where I suppose I kind of want it on Steam, but really wouldn't do anything with it. If anything, Age of Empires coming out in the early 90s or late 80s, whenever it did come out, and it being a real-time strategy game with a lot of survival resource mechanics, where you have to have wood and food and grains and things like that to do things. Those gameplay mechanics in real-time strategies have not really improved or changed at all since the early days of real-time strategies, and those survival mechanics have shifted somewhat into survival games, which didn't really exist back then. And then our final GameDeveloper.com article is that a Saudi investment group has acquired a $1 billion stake in Embracer Group. This is the state-backed public investment fund, which has controversial ties with Saudi leadership. Effectively, it is, I think, the guy who ordered the assassination of Khashoggi, or whatever his name was, the crown prince, or one of the crown princes. Yep, it definitely is just trying to buy influence. You know, at a certain level, I could see somebody making an argument, and I'd probably have to bow to smarter people than me who have paid attention to it. But I could see someone saying that, you know what, the Saudi Arabia and Middle Eastern countries and just growing second world countries and third world countries maybe are physically safer if they do invest in companies and world trade than they are just being kind of isolationist or focusing on their own internal affairs. Because you got to admit that a lot of countries, the United States in particular, definitely have meddled in a lot of internal affairs of South American countries, and a lot of businesses have been helped by the CIA for one reason or another. I don't know really why they're doing that, to manipulate and effectively abuse other countries for cheap labor or cheap resources. So by Saudi Arabia or any country potentially being the boss, being the owner of companies, they in an odd roundabout way, I could at least believe the argument, they might be buying themselves some protection in the same way that if you were to pay bribes to the mob or buy your way into the mob somehow, it probably would afford you some protection from being attacked by the mob or some other group, other gangs. Moving on, back to video games, we have here the fall list. We have here a medieval single-player survival strategy game, which I think that is probably unique enough, with it being rated very positively. It is out of early access, to put that on the wish list. Although, in all fairness, I will almost certainly forget about Siege Survival Gloria Victus, and next time I see it, when I look at the wish list, I'll have no idea what it is. Next we have Siege of Avalon, which I think in this case this game is just too old. Doesn't really have any relevancy or connection to me. So I'm gonna say no to this. I can see other people saying yes, but nope, just too old of a game. We have one from 2021 called, it's a point and click adventure, 9 user reviews. I'll leave that on the fall list and give it some more time. Here we have Sid Classic, which is got a very anime style intro, but definitely looks like it's just a mobile game. I don't know why I would have specifically wanted to have a mobile game on the fall list at all. I almost feel like I accidentally clicked this. Yeah, it's full of in-app purchases, I'm sure. But yeah, that can go. And Shy Eye Labyrinth needs more time. Shuttle Commander is mixed, so we can remove that. Which that's a shame, because I would kind of like a Kerbal Space Program if Kerbal Space Program looked a little bit more realistic. Shutter Nyang has positive reviews, but only 15. So it doesn't really have the relevancy in these. No, I think we can say no to this. Might be a picture mechanic here, but it also kind of feels like it's Korean game first, and I may very well not understand what's going on. There was another game where you take pictures and it let you potentially drag things around and make platforms, and I really wanted to like that game, and unfortunately it just played really poorly. Controls were awful. I think it was called Camera Obscura. Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon. I think having not put up with even making it all the way through Shovel Knight, the original game, playing a spin-off game probably is no. Action-packed puzzle mashup like none other. I almost think I'll put this on the wish list as an act of penance. If I ever get around to buying this and playing this, I'll play it kind of act as an apology for rage quitting and not finishing Shovel Knight, because I do know a lot of people did like Shovel Knight, and it was just not for me. Or at least I was not enjoying it when I was playing it, which is always a possibility, is that I may just not be in the mood to play specific games at specific times. This Shoot Vaders does not look interesting, so I'm questioning why it was even on the follow list. Shoot the Zombie VR does look interesting, but it's a VR game and it doesn't have any relevancy. At a certain point, if I did get a VR headset, though, I think I'd have to lower my standards of requiring at least 30 reviews. And then Shonen Adventure, the Dual Blades here does not look good enough, so we'll get rid of that. And then, since things were all backwards, that is, we are now going to be at the Video Games Chronicles articles, which arguably maybe I should always put the Video Games Chronicles articles at the end, but I think that's probably not the case as far as what should happen. Diablo Immortals director comments on microtransaction missing information. The game has been criticized by some player, saying it's pay to win. Reality is kind of the consensus of what people say, and people are saying and believe that Diablo Immortal is pay to win and full of microtransactions, and yeah, that I don't think the director is going to be capable of saying anything to change people's minds. A leaked Call of Duty Warzone mobile footage shows off Verdansk gameplay, if you want to check that out. Sega will stream a Sonic Central presentation on Tuesday. Well, today's Wednesday, so that already happened. Capcom will host its own showcase presentation next week. 35-minute event. A new company called Nintendo Studios has been spotted on official records. Excuse me. Nintendo has already said it plans to make more movies past the animated Mario movie. So one would assume Nintendo Studios is just a production company for making more movies, unless it is a completely not connected company just using Nintendo and calling itself Nintendo Studios, which they would get sued out of oblivion, I'm sure, if that was the case. Dragon's Dogma's director retweets Capcom showcase announcements, fueling a sequel speculation, which it's possible. It could be nothing. iOS devices will soon support the Switch Pro controller and Joy-Cons, which is an interesting thought, but I don't know why. Like, and then I certainly would ask, could Android devices already support that, or will Android devices catch up for that? It could be a case that Nintendo is going to double down and try again as far as having games on mobile phones. And if that was the case, then yeah, having Joy-Cons and controllers to connect to mobile phones would be a step in the right direction for better games, better gameplay styles. Let's see. Video Games Chronicle says Netflix Resident Evil series has divided opinions. Fans are split over the new take on the Capcom franchise. From what I had heard, I think this new Resident Evil series is going to be taking place in kind of like an alternate reality. And it definitely looks live action, so it's not the animated Resident Evil games. At a certain point, an alternate reality with a zombie outbreak and an Umbrella Corp is only slightly different from The Walking Dead, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was really what they're going to target for this, is The Walking Dead focusing a little bit more on horror and gore that Netflix can get away with, compared to Walking Dead being on TNT or TBS, whatever channel they were on. They were on extended cable channel, so they had some limitations on the horror and gore and the violence. And then adding Umbrella Corporation to The Walking Dead isn't a terrible thought, because The Walking Dead always said from the beginning that it would be a mystery as to how the zombie apocalypse in The Walking Dead started. So there was just no way anything was ever going to be revealed around that, where it won't be a mystery in Resident Evil's case as far as where the T-virus comes from. It comes from Umbrella Corp. We know that. Although some of the Resident Evil games then later say the T-virus was created based on plants, ancient plants, or other experiments. It wasn't just made from scratch in a lab. Let's see. Video Games Chronicle has the Summer Game Fest schedule, your complete 2022 guide. Here you can see there's... Nope, you can't see. Yeah, now you can see. Limited run games, and then Devolver Digital. This Netflix Geek Week gaming is going to be one day of this long running Netflix Geeked Week. Using the phrase geeked ED really, in my mind, harkens back to the idea of a geek being some poor alcoholic who's biting the heads off chickens at a carnival freak show. But yeah, every day they've been putting out different announcements, and then having one day based on gaming right in this whole presentation is an interesting idea. But it also still has Netflix potentially competing with all these other announcements ahead of schedule in previous days, and Netflix is at some level competing with video games always. So that's kind of a strange bedfellows. Xbox and Bethesda showcase combined, which at some point they probably should have picked a name and dropped a name. PC Gaming Show, Xbox Games Showcase Extended. Yeah, this probably would have been Bethesda Game Showcase before, and so now they're saying add Xbox, but probably should have just been Xbox Game Showcase and Xbox Games Showcase Extended. So they're telling you definitely to temper your expectations as far as these announcements. It's mostly going to be talking about games that have already been announced. There's been somewhat of a backlog to actually release games lately because of all the shortages, so it's kind of ridiculous if they were to announce new things. And this is all kind of in that E3 time frame, but E3 is not happening this year and probably never again. Moving on, Battle 2042 Season 1 0 Hour has been dated and detailed with a gameplay trailer if you want to check out that article. E3 claims, and I'm going to add the claims, it will be back in 2023. The ESA has reiterated. Of course, they've said that for like 2 years now, and then they canceled it later. Probably wouldn't be terrible if this was the death knell of the ESA. Almost certainly, if the ESA did disappear and break apart, you would have to have some other organization replace them fairly quickly. Although, maybe you could just dismantle the ESA and then the ESRB ratings would be just what people could label their own games as, or games would just not have ESRB ratings. Walmart will not sell a product without an ESRB rating, probably an ESRB rating of mature or lower, but I could see if the ESA went out of business, the ESRB, which is a subsidiary of the ESA, might just say use our ratings and self-label your games. They're pretty much doing that anyways. They're just filling out a lot of forms saying this is the content in our game, give us a rating. It's not like the ESRB is actually playing the games, and they have been tricked at least a couple times because of that. Let's see. Moving on, Hideo Kojima is reportedly working on a horror game called Overdose. Update: Kojima Productions has reportedly requested that the article in question be unpublished. Which, yeah, that's not gonna really go anywhere. Arguably, this might be the Kojima Productions playbook, though, because we had Norman Reedus announcing or leaking effectively that he was working on a new project. So you could say maybe he was working on Overdose and just thought it was a sequel to Death Stranding 2. Or it could just be that they told Norman Reedus to leak it, and now they've leaked another bit of information, and then they're asking for it to be unpublished, so it definitely doesn't get unpublished. We had already seen this article. Unannounced Nintendo sequel Everybody's 1-2 Switch could reportedly support 100 players, but it's claimed that the game is tested poorly with families and children. Well, if it tests poorly with families and children, then you don't have much of a market to sell to single people and single adults, effectively. Sony Bend reveals a new multiplayer plans for a new IP alongside a fresh logo. We already talked about that. Intellivision is trying to save the Amico by severely cutting staff and licensing out its IP. This Intellivision company that exists now is not the old Intellivision by any means. And this, I think most people pretty much knew this was never coming out and was doomed to failure. I won't directly call it a scam, but it was doomed to fail. Diablo Immortal has made it all the way to the bottom with the lowest ever user score on Metacritic. It is now below 1.0, has a user score of 0.5 out of 10 as of the time of rating. So yeah, people are spending the effort to come in and review it. Like that's a lot, particularly on a mobile game that most people would probably just have never bothered to install or even tried to play. But that's the situation I'm in, which sucks because I think there is probably a version of Diablo Immortal on mobile phones that would work for me if they got rid of all the microtransactions and made some completely different product. And it will be interesting to see if potentially Microsoft comes in and says take out all the microtransactions and just put out a product that gets reviewed well. Let's just cut our losses, spend some effort, spend some money on it, and try and win back the fans. Diablo Immortal really should just be a advertisement for Diablo 4 anyways, even if Diablo 4 is not coming out for several years. We had already talked about Saudi Arabia acquiring a $1 billion stake in Embracer Group. The Silent Hill movies director says he's written a script for a third film. Christoph Gaines says this new film would be unrelated to the previous two, which then I don't know how you specifically call that a third film as much as you just call it the reboot. You can practically do anything in Silent Hill, so making a movie set in Silent Hill works as well as anything else does. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2's teaser trailer leaks ahead of Tuesday's official reveal. I think I've seen most of the Silent Hill movies, at least one of them. Yeah, it's just horror scenery and scenes, so you could take the Silent Hill name off of it and it would be as bad of a horror movie as it is with Silent Hill on the name. Most horror movies are bad by most people's standards, and that's usually the goofy fun around it, is to watch a bad movie. Or at least horror movies have a level of poor quality to them. It's campy. Video Games Chronicle says how to watch the Call of Duty Warfare 2 reveal live if you want to check that out. And then they have a video here. Watch our first hands-on impression of the Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes, which at a certain point that's probably not actual video game news, but it's somewhat informative. So it's one of these Warriors tie-in games where you're just beating up hundreds and hundreds of enemies, and they're still making them, and they still kind of suck as a concept. I think the Japanese audience really needs to have a come to Jesus moment, or maybe come to Buddha moment for the Japanese, where they get away from grindy gameplay mechanics and stop embracing that and loving that, because it is far too prevalent where you see Japanese games that are just mindless button mashing, fighting larger and larger numbers of enemies just because you want mindless grinding. Let's see, the Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 Open Beta is coming first to the PS4 and PS5. The Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes demo is available now. Then our last Video Games Chronicles article says Battlefield 2042 is reportedly in abandoned ship mode as EA switches focus to the next series entry. Which, okay. We'll take that. And then that's going to put us at about 2 hours and 50 seconds, 2 hours and 50 minutes. And then I'll have to play some off screen to get these daily quests done and then spectate. Let me scroll down my Twitter feed. See. Double Fine retweeted that this game Naiad is going to be part of Day of the Devs, which that arguably is the first tweet I've seen from Double Fine in quite a while. I think maybe the Twitter algorithm, if there is an algorithm, has figured out that I'm not particularly interested in a lot of posts from a lot of um, in a lot of video games posts, video game companies post. I'm scrolling down. It is also, I suppose, somewhat surprising that you wouldn't have seen Jeff Gerstmann jump ship back to GameSpot or jump ship back to, or for the first time to like XPlay. In a lot of ways, if I thought Jeff Gerstmann cared, he probably could take over control of XPlay and improve the situation there at G4 somewhat. And honestly, I think it probably would be good for Jeff Gerstmann if he just by circumstances started working with people who were just coworkers and not his friends, or just started working with new people in general. He definitely has that cliquish feel about him from his outside persona. At least he's been hanging around his coworkers and thinking of them more as friends than employees has probably led him to a lot of internal hurt that he could have avoided if he had been more disconnected and maybe just a little bit more professionally aloof as to who he's working with. BioWare is hiring several job listings here, which that definitely does imply there might be a new BioWare game, very possibly a Dragon's Dogma or a Dragon's Age game. I don't know if BioWare actually worked on Dragon's Dogma or if they worked on Dragon's Age, come to think of it. Here's a Hogwarts Legacy tweet. Didn't realize Hogwarts Legacy was still around. Yeah, I am dangerously hitting a point where we may start to get a ridiculous amount of announcements because of the E3 era. So Friday could be fairly long if we actually try to get through all the news. Let's see, PlayStation 5 versions of Resident Evil 7 and the recent Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes have appeared on the PlayStation Network, suggesting they may be released soon, according to Video Games Chronicles. I think that's probably it. There is a GameDeveloper.com article here saying that Fallout 76 devs say mismanagement and crunch led to a buggy launch, which in all fairness, you should probably make that claim as an employee in making video games every single time. It's just always going to be mismanagement and crunch. Mismanagement potentially leading to crunch a lot of times. Current and former ZeniMax employees say that a disregard for employee input snowballed into painful crunch periods on Fallout 76. Which, yeah. And GameDeveloper.com would love to publish that kind of story, so you'll always be able to make that claim even if it's not particularly accurate. Although that does get dangerously close to the mentality that some woke activists believe, where they feel like it's so imperative to win or get the message across that even lying is acceptable. Um, Back to like the Amber Heard thing, her now being proven in court to have lied about things and defame somebody. There is going to be a percentage of people that say, well, it doesn't matter that she lied. She at least brought. Uh, she still should have succeeded and uh, not lost the lawsuit, even if she did lie, because it happened somewhere to somebody. Therefore, it brought awareness of it happening somewhere to somebody, and it was still a good thing. It's just like kind of insane logic, really. Alright, well, after my network fixing, or my ISP fixing the network, I had no more drop frames. So, that's a happy bit of information. And while I have seen some stuttering while playing Ni no Kuni, I'm not really getting a lot of feeling that it's really anything more than just Ni no Kuni sometimes stutters. And it's just half a frame here, and then maybe 20 minutes to an hour later, maybe a half frame there. Not major stuttering, not rebooting of the computer. I haven't seen any errors in the event log like I was seeing before. There is a danger that Windows 10's most recent annual update it's in like a preview point where I could download it now, but it will install itself eventually, and that might change something for the worse. But it very well might fix things too. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.